This is Bel, getting beaten up by his brother Zane, because he's the only one in his family who doesn't have a divine weapon. For a noble bloodline famous for slaying gods, not having that power is a huge disgrace. His younger sister tries to help him, and the other sister put her flat on the ground. A few days later, he got kicked out of the house for still being useless. But stories about weaklings rarely end like that. One day, he finally managed to come back and went straight to the room of Sarah, the only one who tried to help him in the past. With his face full of tears, he apologizes for not having protected her and hugs her like she came back from the dead. She was completely lost, didn't understand a thing. The piece ended when Zane barged into the room with a smirk on his face full of arrogance, looking for a fight like he always did. Our boy was just like Sasuke Uchiha, not showing any reaction at all. Zane asks if he wants a taste of his punch, and the boy simply told him to try it. The Wish version of Gojo Satoru felt challenged and tried to land the hit, but Bel was faster and struck first. The older brother goes down and gets back up full of rage, immediately pulling out his divine weapon against Bel, who was unarmed. Out of nowhere, the protagonist summons a sheath with a bizarre energy coming off it. Zane doesn't care because it's rank E, and he has an ultra-rare weapon. He charges in without any fear, and the unthinkable happens. Using only the sheath, Bel unleashes a sinister magic and summons a blade that cuts Zane's divine weapon clean in half. The tough guy stood there in shock, not understanding where the blade came from if the sheath was empty. Scared out of his mind, he tries to run. Right then, our protagonist draws a revolver and fires a shot that grazes right past his brother's face. Zane looks back terrified and confused, with no idea where all that firepower came from.
What are you aiming at?
Shaking in his boots, he sees the damage from the shot and bolts out toward his father, Duke Galleon, known as the Sword King. Zane makes his father go after Bel, accusing his brother of making a deal with the devil. Sarah was still in the room in shock, watching her brother turn into a completely different person. Shortly after, the troublemaker comes back with backup warning that Bel was done for. Galleon walks up to the boy and says he broke the rules of the house. The two stare each other down in a tense and heavy atmosphere. The Sword King starts releasing his aura, trying to intimidate the kid, but Bel didn't even blink. The old man draws his sword and asks if he isn't afraid to die. Our boy of few words simply releases his magic, and the kid who used to have nothing now shows off multiple divine weapons. The old man saw it and froze on the spot, trying to figure out how his useless son got his hands on the weapons of the greatest warriors. On the day he was kicked out, Bel gathered what little money he had left and blew it all on weapons. After all, normal attacks were useless against knights with divine weapons. The solution was to buy one weapon of every type that existed and learn to use the whole arsenal. Whenever a monster crossed his path, he wiped the floor with it no problem. It was around that time that a hooded guy appeared out of nowhere after a fight. The weirdo said something strange about trusting a boy with the talent to become a hero, fired a blue light and left something stuck in the ground. Bel went straight for it thinking it was a sword, but to his surprise, it was just a sheath. It was the divine sheath of Avalon, a legendary artifact that held the weapons of the 5 greatest warriors. Bel spent years training hard, until he reached the level of going toe-to-toe with a dragon and proving he had mastered Avalon 100%. In the middle of the fight, he summoned the Shield of Achilles, tanking the attack with ease. With the Stormhammer, he took down the dragon in a single blow.
Perfect!
Now that he had full control of Avalon's power, he decided to go back to the city and rescue his sister. 5 years after being kicked out, Bel was back. Arriving at the family's lands, everything was on fire. A civil war had broken out and left the entire castle in ruins. He ran into the castle in a panic and saw the giant door slightly open. When he walked through, he saw the girl's body covered in blood. It was Sarah. He grabbed her in panic because she wasn't responding. Bel let out that gut-wrenching scream of someone who trained for years only to arrive too late in the end. Then a burst of energy tore through his chest. There was still someone in the room, with a mana so powerful it couldn't belong to anyone below S rank. The guy recognized Bel and warned that he'd be seeing his sister soon. Bel connected the dots. This was Sarah's killer. Before he could do anything, his chest was pierced again and everything went dark. Bel staring at his own hands in confusion because he was sure he had been killed. Seeing the priest in front of him and the church's stained glass all around, he realized he had lived this moment before. It was the ceremony from years ago. That's when it clicked. Avalon had the power to go back in time. In his first life, it took years to find the sheath and he only mastered it after a lot of grinding. Now the artifact was already in his hands from the very start, and with 5 overpowered weapons, the game was about to change. Back in the past, the first thing he did was run straight to Sarah. After crying with her dead in his arms, seeing his sister alive shattered the boy's heart. And then, as you already know, he beat the living daylights out of his brother Zane, and the old man found out he had legendary weapons. From that point on, the former useless son became the family's new favorite. Once the doors shut, Bel finally relaxed. The Duke's pressure had been crushing. He just had to keep getting stronger, though having a child's body made that harder. He needed to hit D rank fast, and to do that, he had to hunt monsters and absorb more mana. So he headed for the nearest forest, planning to kill some orcs. But an orc was already down, its head lying apart from its body. Something else had been slaughtering everything in the forest. The monsters there never stood a chance. A far more dangerous beast was hunting them instead. Its roar shook the forest and warned everything nearby who ruled that place. For Bell, that forest brought back old memories. After being cast out in his past life, he had trained there for a while. Still, something felt off. He'd been walking for some time and hadn't seen a single monster. Then something watched him from the bushes. Soon he found the orcs, or what was left of them. Their bodies had been torn to pieces. It was brutal and completely strange. While he tried to figure it out, a terrifying sound suddenly rang out. Bell spun around, just in time to block an attack already coming at him. The impact was stronger than his own power and sent him flying. This was the last thing he wanted to run into. It was Fenrir. That explained the empty forest. A D-rank monster like this had scared everything else away. Bell barely had any mana left and was only around E rank. If he could have escaped right then, he gladly would have. But one look into the beast's eyes told him running meant instant death. He had to stay sharp unless he wanted to end up as dog food. The next move caught him off guard. The monster was even faster than he expected. He barely managed to throw himself aside and avoid the strike. At once he summoned the fire-spinning pistol. He fired several rounds at the beast, but it dodged every shot. Now he was in serious trouble. His mana was too low, so the bullets weren't fast enough. The gun was useless. He needed another plan. Drawing his sword, Bell rushed in, while the beast came at him with deadly claws. He slipped past the strike and found a small opening. Bell attacked, but Fenrir dodged that too, something he hadn't expected. Now he had to rethink everything. This fight could kill him. At full power, he would have crushed this mutt already. Instead, the furious wolf charged again. Bell knew he couldn't beat that speed, so he braced himself and tried to block. Even then he still took damage. He was getting cornered, and little by little, the beast was overwhelming him. It pressed in, ready to make him its next meal. But Bell had only just been reborn. He refused to die again this soon. He had to call out Achilles' shield. With that, he could defend and strike back. Still, the creature's agility was insane, and it hit him from the side. Bell crashed down and lost hold of the shield. At this rate, the fight was over. He'd end up as that savage dog's dinner. Everything he'd tried so far had failed. Even the hammer would be hard to use. The beast was too fast. That left only one weapon. With no better choice, he used it at once. The beast lunged in to finish him. Bell shut his eyes and focused. Right before the blow landed, he called Aegis, but the attack had already been launched. Then, strangely, nothing happened. A gauntlet wrapped in dark energy had appeared on his hand. He never wanted to use it, but it was better than dying twice. Fenrir came again, moving even faster than before. Too bad the fight was already decided. Bell had become much faster too. With the hammer in hand, he suddenly appeared above the beast. Now it couldn't keep up with him, and the hammer was ready to crush its skull. One clean, brutal hit slammed into the creature. It screamed in pain, its teeth breaking out of place. Aegis was the gauntlet of darkness. It boosted the user's physical power, but it also filled their mind with a voice telling them to destroy. The wolf was still alive, and even angrier. Meanwhile, Bell only grew stronger with each passing moment, and the urge to kill kept rising too. He waited eagerly for the next charge, then slipped past every attack. Now the wolf was the one at a disadvantage, and Bell was clearly starting to enjoy himself. Before long, the wolf was dead. Bell was relieved to end it fast. That weapon couldn't be removed during battle, and the longer it stayed on, the deeper it dragged its user into darkness. Now he needed to figure out why a Fenrir was in that forest. While thinking it over, he noticed something odd about the hammer. It was fully charged with energy. By killing Fenrir, he had gained its traits. Beating strong monsters was far better than farming weak ones. He couldn't wait to test it. Later in the castle garden, Sarah spent the afternoon making something under a tree. At last, her flower crown was done. She hoped Belle would like it, but then someone yanked it from her hands. The girl mocked it as ugly, saying that suited the filthy girl who made it. That nasty girl was Jessica. She asked Spencer what he thought. The strange-looking boy agreed right away. He was only there to follow Jessica's lead. Jessica tossed the flower crown up, and Spencer shredded it with his whip. Sarah hated it, but she couldn't do anything. Jessica was bored and wanted entertainment. With her weapon in hand, she told Sarah to come with her. It was time to practice her aim. She fired at the girl, and Sarah froze in fear. Then Belle stepped in and blocked the shot with his sheath, saying he'd play with Jessica instead. Sarah was stunned. She hadn't even noticed him arrive. Belle added that he wanted a reason to test his divine armament anyway. Jessica had no idea what she was seeing. To her, no mutt had the right to stand in her way. Belle focused on calming Sarah first, promising she was safe now. Then he turned to deal with the spoiled brat in front of him. Spencer stepped up, trying to look threatening. Belle already knew he was basically Jessica's servant, so he faced him proudly as the Duke's son. But Spencer refused to respect a concubine's child. That annoyed Belle, while Jessica mocked him for acting confident after only beating Zane by luck. They were sure Zane had just let his guard down, and since Belle used only a sheath, they took him for the weakest one there. Belle closed his eyes and told her to watch closely. She'd soon learn whether this was luck or skill. Jessica hadn't been ready for that answer. Uneasy now, she ordered Spencer to crush that trash at once, and he was more than happy to do it. Every place his whip touched turned to ice. Belle wasn't impressed. Spencer was a D-rank paladin, and his divine armament was an ice whip. On paper he was much stronger than Belle, who was only E-rank, but Belle was still Belle. Spencer bragged that he'd freeze Belle's legs first, then his arms and body until he couldn't move, and finish by smashing his face with the whip. Belle cut him off, basically reminding him he was just a side character. Spencer snapped back, warning him not to look down on him. Then he swung, ready to turn Belle into an ice pop. Belle dodged it with ease. Jessica couldn't believe it. Spencer might be decent for a D-rank paladin, but to Belle, he was still nothing special. After all the training Belle had done in his past life, this felt like a kid's game. Sarah was amazed too. Her brother looked like he was dancing. Spencer, on the other hand, got more annoyed and said Belle did nothing but run. So Belle decided to prove he wasn't running. From here on, he said, he wouldn't dodge at all. That confidence shocked everyone. Belle wanted to see if the loudmouth could really back up his words. Spencer took the bait and rushed in. This time he swore he'd freeze Belle solid. The whip lashed out while Belle stood there with his arms spread. It struck him again and again and Sarah panicked. Then the ice finally spread. His arms and legs were frozen in place. Once Belle couldn't move, Spencer got ready to go for his face. Belle calmly asked if that was really all he could do, because if so, it was his turn. Those words made Spencer pause. Belle instantly called for Ragnarok. The sheath at his waist began to glow, and a gun appeared in his hand. Spencer couldn't believe Belle had a second divine weapon. Belle poured out his mana to break the ice, and flames started rising from the gun. In the next moment, he was free again. Jessica was stunned. 2 divine armaments were shocking enough, but using both this well made even less sense. Now it was time to punish their arrogance. Belle fired blazing shots at Spencer, who instantly realized he was in danger. He tried to protect himself with his ice whip, covering his body in a layer of frost, thinking it would stop the flames. Belle knew better. The fire kept coming, and the bullet tore straight through the ice. Spencer could only watch in horror. The shot slammed into his chest with crushing force. It didn't pierce through, but the damage was huge. He dropped to the ground as Jessica stared in shock. That mud attack shattered the ice and dropped a D-rank paladin. Jessica was only E-rank, so she knew she stood no chance. Belle turned to her. He told her it was over. Jessica called out her divine armament. She warned him not to come closer, but her fear was so bad her hands shook around the weapon. She fired again and again and missed every shot, then begged him to stay back. Even then she couldn't move right. Her legs gave out, and she fell from sheer fear. Belle stopped in front of her. Jessica only grew more terrified. The boy standing there could kill her if he wanted, but instead he gave a firm warning. Never mess with Sarah again. She couldn't even answer. The only thing left was to run while she still could. Sarah rushed over to her brother, hugely relieved. She asked if Spencer's whip hurt him, but Belle brushed it off and called the guy pathetically weak. When Sarah praised him, Belle said he only got stronger so he could protect her. Then she showed him a new flower crown to replace the one that got ruined. She set it on Belle's head and thanked him for always protecting her. It was a simple gift from his little sister, and Belle swore that one day, the whole country would honor her kind heart. The problem was the people who looked down on children of concubines, so proving himself wouldn't be easy. He needed real respect, and to get it, there was something he had to do right away. Outside the palace, the Duke stood in silent meditation with his sword in hand. His focus was incredible. After a while, he made a few clean swings and sliced through falling leaves. Only then did he notice Belle had come to see him. He asked what the boy wanted. Belle said he came to ask for permission. Curious, the Duke asked permission for what? Before answering, Belle dropped to one knee. That level of respect caught the Duke's attention. Belle asked to take the C-rank admission exam. The request clearly interested the Duke. Belle said he wanted to serve the king under his house. His family had duties to the royal family, like escort work and hunting monsters, and doing that was the fastest way to raise his standing in the family. By clearing hard missions, he could earn real recognition, and to get the best jobs, he needed to pass this exam. The Duke saw that the boy's goals were serious, but said it was still too soon. Belle should become a proper paladin first, before thinking about C-rank. Right now, he was only F-rank, and had just gotten his divine ornament. The Duke told him to aim for E-rank first. What he didn't expect was Belle pulling out a fang and asking if this changed anything. The Duke recognized it at once. A Fenrir fang. He immediately asked where Belle got it. Without a word, Belle showed one of his divine weapons. The hammer crackled with heavy lightning. Belle casually admitted the fight was a little rough, but he still managed to tame that stubborn mutt. Seeing the lightning around the hammer, the Duke realized Belle could already use attributes. He'd even beaten a D-rank beast. That was enough. Belle had earned a shot at the C-rank exam. The Duke agreed on one condition: Bell was not allowed to disgrace the duchy. Full of confidence, Bell thanked him and promised he wouldn't. At the test site, he found a crowd of applicants waiting. T-rank was a huge wall, and most people never got past it. The young boy quickly drew attention. Most of the others were adults, while he was still just a kid. Still, Bell walked straight to the front desk. The attendant asked who he was, and whether his father came with him, then stared when Bell said he was here to take the exam himself. She told him to come back when he was older. Bell asked her not to treat him like a child. He was a paladin too. While they were talking, someone walked up to him and told him to quit pretending. A little kid had no place here and should leave. Bell had no clue what this guy's issue was, but he already looked annoying. The others knew exactly who he was. His name was Lennox, and his wind sword unleashed 8 slashes with every swing. It was a flashy power, and he already had plenty of fans. Lennox sneered that if the kid wanted to take the exam, he should at least be as good as him. Bell didn't even know this guy was supposed to be famous, while Lennox doubted he even had a divine ornament. Bell touched the sheath at his waist and said it was right there. Seeing only a sheath, Lennox burst out laughing and said no one could fight with junk like that. The others joined in, mocking Bell's ornament and acting glad they weren't that pathetic. Lennox said he didn't care if some clueless brat wanted to get himself killed, but it annoyed him that Bell taking the exam made it seem like they were equals. As he walked off, he told the little trash to go back to his mother's lap. Once that was over, Bell told the clerk to sign him up. She asked if he was really sure, but he didn't hesitate. To enter, he needed a recommendation from a B-rank knight or higher, plus at least D-rank status. With a proper letter, the issue could be settled. She still thought no one would recommend a child, but when she read it, she saw it was from the Duke of Catastrophe himself. That was when she realized the child in front of her was the Duke's son. Soon, all the applicants gathered in the arena for the exam. The instructor began explaining the rules. First, they'd be sent into a dungeon with a teleport stone. They had 5 hours to return with a jewel of light, and only 3 existed inside. Anyone who brought one back would pass. Lennox was sure one of those spots belonged to him. The other applicants looked nervous, and Bell was honestly embarrassed for him. After the explanation, the instructor asked if everyone was ready. The group answered with confidence, and the exam began at once. Then it was Bell's turn to enter through the teleport stone. The room lit up, and in the next instant he was somewhere else. A moment later, he was inside the dungeon cave. Everyone had been scattered to different spots on the first floor, so Bell had to choose a path. The dungeon was big, but he had more than enough time. Since he was here anyway, he planned to make the most of it. There were plenty of monsters inside, and the more he killed, the more mana he could build. Right away, he gripped his weapon and decided to hunt everything in the dungeon. Elsewhere, the other candidates were already having a rough time with the monsters. They were stronger than expected. Those lizards had vicious eyes and were more than enough to scare weak fighters. Lennox couldn't understand why everyone else was struggling with such easy prey. He cut them down with a smug grin, acting like it took no effort at all. The others watched in admiration, and he kept tearing through monster after monster. Drunk on his own hype, he bragged that he wasn't average like the rest. He even complained the test was boring. The weaker applicants gladly followed him for safety, and Lennox told them they were lucky to witness his talent up close, because people like them were only good for tagging along. After searching the dungeon for a while, the group found a huge door that had to be the final room. Lennox hoped it would finally be entertaining. Instead, they found several D-rank monsters, with the jewels sitting on an altar at the back. One of the beasts started moving toward them. Lennox stepped up, sure he could cut it apart, and unleashed a storm of slashes, but the monster's body was so tough it took no damage at all. Then it struck back. For the first time in the dungeon, Lennox was on the defensive. The hit knocked him off balance, and he was stunned that his attacks had done nothing. The others could hardly believe it either. Then they panicked, because the rest of the monsters turned toward them. The guy from Clava had to fight fast just to stay alive. He landed a solid hit on one of them, and learned right away that normal physical attacks were useless. At the same time, the woman was barely holding on against a flying monster. That thing could launch feathers like blades without getting close. Lennox finally understood how brutal this last stage really was. Each monster seemed built to resist someone's divine power, and against that stitched creature, he was completely helpless. Frozen with fear, he shut his eyes and waited for the end. But before the monster could hit him, it was destroyed. He opened his eyes in shock. Bell was relieved. If he'd shown up a little later, things would have ended badly. He'd been having plenty of fun hunting, but Lennox recognized him at once. It was that little piece of trash from earlier. Another monster that resisted physical attacks came straight at Bell, so he switched tactics. For this enemy, the sword was the right choice. Lennox was stunned to see Bell's divine armament transform. Bell cut the creature down in one blow. Next he turned to the one in the air. He had the perfect weapon for that too, one that could fire again and again. He filled the flying monster with bullets and dropped it on the spot. The others could only stare. Somehow, the boy with the useless sheath was the strongest one there. Lennox couldn't understand how Bell had more than one divine armament, let alone used each of them so well. There wasn't much time, so Bell had to clear out the remaining monsters fast. From the side, the arrogant knight could only stare. He couldn't believe a kid was this good. Still unfazed, Bell kept cutting the monsters down. Once the room was safe, all he had left to do was take one of the jewels. He walked up to the altar and grabbed it. The other two rushed over and instantly started praising him, which only annoyed Bell. A second later, they showed their true colors and started trashing the man they had just been admiring. To them, Lennox was worthless next to Bell, and they claimed they had been wrong to look up to him. That whole fight had completely crushed Lennox's pride. Meanwhile, the other two assumed they'd just take the last two jewels for themselves. Bell didn't answer. He simply called out his hammer. He already had the jewel he needed to pass, and now he was about to do something he found much more fun. With one heavy swing, he smashed the altar. The two shameless followers froze in disbelief. They shouted, asking what he had done, then realized the other jewels were gone. Holding up the only one left, Bell told them that if they wanted it, they could try taking it from him. He went on to call them useless parasites who lived off other people's talent, the kind of people who throw someone away the second they stop being useful to them. In Bell's eyes, people like that had no right to call themselves knights. Getting dressed down by a child wrecked what little pride they had left. After that, Bell walked out and left them behind. Lennox actually seemed to take the lesson to heart. He admitted his arrogance, accepted his weakness and thanked Bell, but swore he wouldn't stay like this forever. Bell was surprised by that honesty, and by the fire still left in him, then agreed they would meet again someday. Outside, Bell celebrated. He had finally become a C-rank knight, and all the monsters he defeated had boosted his mana a lot. Now he only needed to earn respect in his own house, so he could protect his sister. With that in mind, he headed back to the Duke's residence to share the news. But when he arrived, the Duke was busy with an important meeting. The knights were talking about a group planning to overthrow the Meldia family. 3 B-rank paladins were moving toward their territory, and the Duke's house had been ordered to take them out. Apparently, another noble family had already suffered because of them. There were even rumors those paladins used forbidden magic on their weapons. Now the B-rank paladins understood why they had been called in. The Duke made it clear they couldn't let karma keep operating, so they had to wipe them out at once. One knight then noticed someone was missing. Jin still wasn't there. Just then, a young man set a book on the table and asked what the meeting was about. Everyone immediately turned toward him. He calmly said there was nothing to discuss. He, the future Duke, had already destroyed that organization himself. Elsewhere, a maid brought a meal to her lady, letting her know the food was ready. Sarah moved to sit at the table and politely thanked the maid for her work. The woman left without caring much about the thanks. Sarah looked deeply unhappy. She stared at the food with no interest at all. Then Bell came in and announced himself. He looked thrilled to see her, and Sarah lit up right away. She said she had been worried because she didn't know where he'd gone. Bell explained he had something important to do and brought her gifts too. On the table he laid out a full meal. Sarah was especially happy to see the apple pie and hoped they could eat it together. But Bell couldn't just enjoy the moment. This was the same poor food she always got, all because even the servants looked down on the children of concubines. That only made him more determined to improve her life as soon as possible. Back in the meeting room, the discussion was still going on. The Duke was impressed that one of his sons had defeated Karma alone. To him that meant Jin had probably already reached A rank. As expected, his eldest son was on a completely different level. Jin then took a seat at the table and asked if his father had anything else to say. The Duke did. The king had given their family another mission. They were to escort Princess Rilke Schertevelaine. She would be passing near the duchy, and they had to make sure she reached her destination safely. One knight questioned whether the royal guard wasn't enough. Another pointed out that the royal family still shouldn't know Karma was no longer a threat, so the safest path would be through Rakata. While they discussed it, someone else stepped into the hall. Bell asked them to wait before deciding. That instantly drew everyone's attention. The knights recognized him at once. It was Bell. The Duke couldn't hide how pleased he was with his son's talent. So the exam was already done. Bell showed his certificate and confirmed he was now C rank. Reaching that rank at his age was amazing. The Duke then asked why he had interrupted the meeting. Bell said he wanted to propose a different route for the escort mission. One of the knights was shocked that a child had anything to add. Bell explained that the Rakata route had no monsters, which was exactly why bandits filled the area, and the trip would take 3 days. A different path would be better. One knight warned that area was extremely dangerous, but Bell knew the monsters there well. Most were chimeras and dark horrors. Since both hunt at night, traveling by day would be far safer. It would also cut the trip down to just 1 day. The knight had to admit Bell had a point. After hearing him out, the Duke saw that Bell was confident and knew monsters very well. Now all that mattered was the final decision, because Bell wanted the job himself, and said he could protect the princess. That made the Duke pause and think. Then Jin finally joined in, and the whole room turned tense. He demanded to know why this mutt was speaking in front of them. His pressure was so overwhelming that even the others stiffened in fear. Bell had almost forgotten how frightening his older brother's presence was. Even so, he refused to back down. He brought out his divine armament and said he was completely serious, promising he could escort the princess safely no matter what happened. Curious, Jin asked if Bel thought he could stop him. Bel answered that a knight stands by his word. Jin snapped at him and told him to shut up, acting as if Bel's words were an insult to him. Then Razor, Jin's secretary, and likely a B-rank paladin by now, stepped forward. Jin, clearly interested, ordered his secretary to test Bel. Razor summoned his divine armament too, ready to put the boy down. He intended to teach this child a lesson, the son of a concubine. Even without moving, Bel stayed sharply aware of everything around him. The secretary moved in, ready to strike first, and Bel realized this would be much harder than he expected. Still, he blocked the attack cleanly, which even Razor found impressive. Jin also seemed pleased by what he saw. Bel was fast, but it was still far too soon for him to beat a B-rank paladin. Then the Duke spoke up firmly, and ended it. He declared that Bel would handle the escort mission. Razor asked if the Duke was really serious. But with Karma already gone thanks to Jin, the Duke said this would make a fine first mission for Bel. Bel bowed and thanked him, promising he wouldn't fail. Jin kept watching the boy closely, wearing a dark smile that suggested something else was on his mind. Bel's next stop was the royal palace. It was his first time there, and he headed straight for the gate to enter. The guard stopped him at once and said he couldn't just walk in. Bel introduced himself, showed his paladin certificate, and explained he had been assigned to escort the princess. They struggled to believe a kid that young was already C-rank. Once they confirmed who he was, they let him through. Even then, the guards still doubted he could protect Her Highness, but Bel stayed completely focused. At last, the princess's carriage arrived. She took one look at him and called her bodyguard cute. Then she apologized and said she probably wouldn't need his help. Elsewhere, a man on a throne asked whether the princess had already left. His servant replied that she should already be on the road. Along with several guards, the Duke's son was also part of her escort. The man had heard that son was Bel, and that he was still just a child. Figuring the boy must be gifted, he told his servant to stay careful and use the secret weapon if necessary. The servant revealed blades hidden in his hands and said that wouldn't be needed. His specialty was killing people before they even noticed him. Meanwhile, the carriage kept moving. Inside were the princess, Bel, and the guards. The mission sounded simple, but it mattered a lot, and finishing it was key to helping his sister. There was just one problem. Bel felt completely out of place. It was clear he wasn't welcome. Trying not to sound rude, he asked why the princess had said she wouldn't need him. She paused before answering that she didn't like relying on other people. She had her own divine armament, and wasn't as helpless as everyone thought. Bel quickly realized she was even more prideful than he'd expected. The princess turned her gaze back outside. The city carried on as normal. For some reason that stirred something in her. She watched with real excitement, and Bel liked seeing that side of her. Still, his attention made her uneasy. He apologized and said she reminded him a lot of his sister, who would probably react the exact same way to all of this. The princess asked if he and his sister were close, and Bel said they were. They played together all the time. Since Sarah was still little, their games were simple things. The princess admitted she had many siblings, but she couldn't trust any of them. Bel guessed it was because of fights over succession, and felt sorry for her. He told her his own home wasn't much different. Bel said his siblings bully them for being born to a concubine, and with his mother gone, no one is left to protect them. That caught the princess's attention. Bel told her she probably understood that feeling too, and if she wanted, she could talk to him. She shut that down right away. She refused to rely on anyone, especially him. Then she snapped that he knew nothing about her life, and acting like he did was rude. Meanwhile, outside the city walls, someone was watching the road. By nightfall, they reached their destination on schedule, though the trip had worn the princess out. The gates opened, and she was welcomed inside. Still, she had no idea who the young man greeting her was. He introduced himself as Peter, a knight of that kingdom, and said they were glad she had arrived. Bel recognized the name, but couldn't place it yet. He also found it odd that they were met outside the city, while the people behind the ambush got ready, and the princess's escort stayed out there. There were plenty of guards around, but Bel still felt something was off. Then a dagger flew at them. Bel knew the princess was exposed out here. He reacted at once, and used his divine armament to shield her. The princess and her guards were caught off guard. An assassination attempt had started, and she was clearly the target. More daggers came flying in, enough to turn this into a real crisis. Peter stepped in too, using his sword to block the attack. He declared that nothing would happen to her. Watching him fight, Bel guessed Peter was at least level B. The assassins had to retreat before finishing the job. Peter sent his knights after them, and ordered the princess taken inside. Bel was left outside as she was escorted away. Before going in, she glanced back nervously. Once inside, they told her she was safe, but she insisted she could protect herself. As one knight promised to guard her, his throat was suddenly cut. The princess froze in horror, and then the truth hit her. Peter was the one who did it. Now she understood the real threat had been beside her all along. Peter stared at the fallen guard. That man's death had meant nothing. The princess had no idea what would happen next. Peter calmly told her she would be dead in a few moments. For all her talk about defending herself, she couldn't do anything. Peter closed in on her slowly. She was so scared that she couldn't summon her divine armament. With a sick grin, Peter dropped any act he had left. Now the princess truly needed someone to save her. Suddenly, the window shattered, and Peter was caught off guard. One of his men was taken out, and the one who burst in was Belle, the last person either of them expected. Belle apologized for being late. He stepped in through the broken window and faced the princess. Then he told her he'd handle the rest. Peter had expected the guards outside to fall for the trap. He never thought Belle could stand against him, until Belle finally remembered exactly who he was. That was when Peter got confused. Belle called him by his real name, Von Rigel. Peter was stunned that a child knew that secret. Belle even knew the details of his divine armament. 2 sets powered by 3 thunder dice. With it, he'd already killed several counts and even brought down a marquis. Impressed and uneasy, Peter demanded to know how Belle learned all that. In Belle's past life, he had been the one who brought Peter to justice, so he knew everything. He never expected Peter to target the princess this time, but now that he had, Belle wasn't letting him escape. Even as a child, he was making Peter nervous. Peter admitted this was getting interesting, but he still believed no kid could beat a level B paladin. For most people, that would be impossible. But against Peter, Belle had no doubts at all. Irritated by that confidence, Peter swore he'd make Belle regret it. Belle already knew Peter's first move would be to throw his weapons, and right on cue, Peter launched a spread of daggers. Belle avoided every one of them with ease. He was ready because he knew a hidden follow-up was coming, a diagonal slash from the right. Peter was shocked that none of his attacks had landed, but Belle already knew he'd try to strike from behind next. His hand was already set to summon his divine armament. The sword came out in time, and Belle blocked the sneak attack. He knew Peter's whole pattern. Peter couldn't understand how this brat was keeping up with his speed. Belle told him he could end this whenever he wanted, so if Peter valued his life he should surrender. That only made Peter furious. Feeling mocked, he vowed to cut the boy to pieces, but his rage made him easier to read. He swung again and again, yet every strike missed. The princess was amazed. Belle looked small, but he was handling a killer like it was easy. He shut down every attack. Watching him, the princess realized she had misjudged him badly. Then the ring on her finger started to glow. Belle had run out of patience and said he'd finish this now. His next strike landed cleanly. Peter was wounded and forced to rethink his approach. He realized Belle was reading all his movements. Just like his boss had warned, this kid was either unbelievably gifted or hiding something more, so Peter couldn't afford to be careless. So he decided to use his strongest trump card. Belle saw it coming. Peter was about to use his light barrier ability. Even so, Belle said it wouldn't save him. Peter took that as empty arrogance. Then he opened a small vial. Even knowing what it was, Belle tensed up. It contained the tears of the Dragon King. Peter smashed it on the ground, and the effect hit like a powerful stimulant. It was a rare item that boosted the user's mana for a short time. Peter sneered that Belle would regret letting his guard down. He threw his daggers again, but this time they were far stronger. Belle had to be careful, because blades now surrounded him. They hung in the air, sealing him in from every side. Peter thought victory was finally his because Belle had been trapped inside a barrier of light. The force even lifted Belle into the air. The princess watched in alarm. Belle used his shield and tried to break free. He poured its power into smashing the barrier, but the wind it made still wasn't enough. Peter hadn't finished yet. His daggers glowed brighter, crackling with electricity. Energy spread through the whole barrier, and Belle convulsed inside it. Peter said he'd end this quickly. Half conscious, Belle realized he couldn't lose here. Then arrows suddenly flew across the room, striking the daggers. That shattered the barrier completely. Only then did Peter understand what had happened. The princess had finally summoned her divine armament. Belle was risking his life for her, and she refused to stay frozen in fear any longer. Her interference only made Peter angrier. He rushed at her to finish the job. The princess froze again, but Belle only needed that little bit of help. At last, Peter realized he was in trouble. Belle hit him with a deep, clean strike. It was enough to put him down. Belle had won. Peter collapsed and didn't move again. After catching his breath, Belle asked if the princess was hurt. She looked at him sadly, but said nothing. Instead, she walked over to him. Touching his face, she pointed out that he was the only one in the room who had been injured. She apologized, saying he had been dragged into her succession struggle. Belle told her it was fine, and that she really was as strong as she claimed. She answered that she wasn't as strong as her bodyguard. Grateful for everything, she promised that if he ever needed her, she would stand up for him. Belle knelt and thanked the princess. She looked at him with clear admiration. Then she removed the ring from her finger and gave it to him as a sign of thanks and friendship. Belle knew exactly what it was. That ring was no ordinary gift. At last, the mission was over, and no one had died. Back home, Belle was brought before the Duke. The Duke heard the full report about the escort mission. Belle said he had completed it successfully, but the Duke could tell there was more to the story. On Belle's hand was the Ring of Solomon, a gift from the princess as proof of her trust. It was one of the royal family's treasures, a powerful mana artifact. The Duke could hardly believe Belle had received something so valuable, and and now he seemed even more impressive than before. The Duke couldn't hide how pleased he was. He told Bell that he would be enrolled in Athens at once. Bell hadn't expected that at all. Athens was an elite academy for paladins, reserved for nobles. Most of Bell's family studied with private tutors instead. By tradition, only those with a real shot at inheriting the house were sent there. That meant Bell was now part of the race to become heir. The Duke ordered him to keep training until he received word about the start of classes, but Bell still had something to say, and his father asked what it was. Bell stood firm before him. He had a request to make. Then the doors opened, and Bell was already outside the hall with his sister, who was thrilled. She couldn't believe this was really her new room. Even the bed was far more comfortable now. The Duke approved it himself. He wanted them moved into the main house so others would treat them with more respect. His sister could barely contain her excitement. Then she noticed his hand looked different. There was a small cut on it. He told her he got hurt during his last mission. That made her worry a little. Still, it didn't last long. They went back to playing, and that lifted his mood too. From now on, Syra would be safe and cared for. Now he had to think about his own future. In 5 years, a disaster would come. His sister could be in danger again, so he needed answers, and he had to find whoever caused it. To do that, he had to become his family's heir. Later, one of Jin's servants came to report something, and waited for permission to speak. Jin didn't even look up from his painting. Still focused, he listened as the servant reported that the illegitimate brother would be sent to Athena Academy. No one had gone there since Jin himself, so the servant thought they should get rid of Bell right away. Jin wasn't interested. He finally set the painting aside. For now, he said, his brother wasn't a threat. In fact, Bell getting stronger would help him. There was something Jin enjoyed far more. The servant looked confused. Jin showed his true twisted nature. He liked crushing people only after they'd fully grown. So everything would happen the way he wanted. Even after hearing that, the servant still thought it was dangerous. Bell already had several divine weapons, and had beaten a level B paladin. Just to be safe, the servant felt they should strike now. At that time, Bell was outside training. He wanted to sharpen his special abilities before entering the academy. The problem was that he needed to hunt a lot of monsters to do it. Then, in the reflection of his sword, he spotted Jin's servant coming his way, and stayed on guard. The man approached and spoke politely. That was the last thing Bell expected from someone on the other side. Since he knew exactly who the man served, Bell asked why he was there. The servant said he came to apologize for what happened before. Pointing a blade at one of the Duke's sons had been disrespectful. For a second, Bell wondered if the man might actually be decent, and told him not to dwell on it. The servant thanked him for being understanding. Then he said there was something else. Bell kept his sword in hand. The servant asked if he wanted to join a monster subjugation mission. It was an odd offer. He explained that Jin and the other paladins were busy with something else. After seeing Bell's skill, he said he wanted to help him improve. The invitation felt suspicious. Bell couldn't simply refuse, but he knew he had to stay careful. Even so, he accepted. The servant thanked him warmly, all while planning to kill him on the mission. Bell asked where they were headed. The answer was a remote place called Ika. Bell knew exactly what that meant. He had almost forgotten, but that place was perfect for a special way to raise his mana. Ambrosia was a rare item that could permanently increase it. Soon the carriage left for the monster hunt. Inside, Bell looked forward to killing monsters, and maybe finding Ambrosia too, but that wouldn't be easy. To get it, he had to enter a hidden dungeon. Luckily, he knew where one was. It would appear near the city called Ethica. By the time they arrived, it was already night, so they needed a place to stay before the servant gave the details. Their target was a group of leviathans. Several had been reported in the area, and they were level C monsters. Since it was late, they would begin at dawn, after getting some rest. Bell said he was heading to his room. As he went upstairs, the servant watched him. The man thought Bell was a fool who had no idea what was coming. He planned to make the death look like an accident. No matter how gifted Bell was, he was only level C, easy prey. Once inside his room, Bell figured Razor was probably already asleep. He summoned his shield, then used wind magic on it through the window. The artifact turned into a flying platform, and he headed for the hidden dungeon in the monster forest. He and his master had found it long ago, and no one else knew where it was. At last he landed. The shield vanished and Bell spotted a small entrance. Thinking he'd found the dungeon, he went inside. Before long, he found a huge gate. That was exactly what he wanted. Hidden dungeons are ranked by color, and blue means level A, green means level B, and clearing one gives ambrosia that matches the dungeon's rank. It would help a lot, so Bell got ready to enter. First, he had to defeat the boss. In his past life, he had faced this dungeon at only level D, even though his master warned him it was too soon. Even now, it might still be tough, but fear wasn't enough to make him turn back. He reached into the gate. As he stepped through, one thought stayed in his mind. He had to get stronger fast. Inside, he was already fighting the first monster. It didn't seem that hard at first. Bell watched the Phantom Knight closely. It was ready to rush him again. Its attacks were fast and sharp, but Bell kept blocking them. While defending, he found an opening and struck when the knight was exposed. Still, the hit wasn't enough. Instead, the impact threw Bell backward. He needed another weapon. So he pulled out the hammer. He landed a solid blow with it, yet the creature took no damage. Normal attacks couldn't break that armor. He had to change tactics. Switching back to his sword, he made the blade shine. This time he attacked with magic. The blows connected, but the armor still wouldn't break. He'd never fought anything like it before, and being only level C made it worse. The Phantom Knight pressed him again. Cornered, Bell had to come up with something fast. If that armor was so strong, then it had to have some weakness, and Bell thought he'd found it. A bullet coated in mana should work. He added Fire Spitter to the attack, and started charging the shot. The Phantom Knight kept closing in. Only 2 seconds left. The enemy moved into striking range. Right before it could hit him, the charge finished. Bell fired at the armor, and this time it worked. The blast shattered the armor. The creature dropped, defeated. Bell fell too, knocked down by the recoil. When it was over, he let out a long breath. So that was the weakness. A magic attack, strong enough to punch through. Without a divine weapon like his, he would have been in real trouble. If even this was so hard, the boss had to be terrifying. Still, hidden dungeons were worth it, because the monsters could drop rare items. One potion restored his stamina and mana, so he drank it right away. Then he kept moving. He pushed forward, taking down every monster in his way, until he finally reached his goal. Behind that giant gate was the strongest enemy. Bell didn't know if it would be a demon or some huge serpent, but he was about to find out. He stepped into the final chamber. It felt like an arena. Then he heard something. A knight-shaped shadow appeared, and Bell's body tensed up at once. The pressure was crushing. The monster in front of him was clearly on another level. Its eyes glowed a bright, bloody red. The knight slowly came closer. This had to be the dungeon boss. Bell braced himself and stayed fully alert. The Phantom Knight glanced at its sword, then moved it in one sharp motion. The attack was starting. Bell had only an instant to react, or the fight would end right there. What came next was devastating. Bell managed to open some distance, but he still had to dodge blow after blow. One clean hit would kill him. The creature turned on him again, forcing him to jump away. That gave him the opening to summon his sword. Now he could fight back. He found a gap and slashed the Phantom Knight across the back, but the armor was even tougher than he expected. Breaking through it wouldn't be easy. There was no time to think. He focused on dodging and went back to the one plan that had worked before. Fire Spitter was still his best option. This time, he would charge it longer, 5 full seconds. He just needed a little more time. The moment it was ready, he fired at the Phantom Knight, hoping this would end it. The blast flew straight at the target and hit cleanly, but to Bell's shock, it did nothing. Then he spotted a strange mark on the knight's chest. Its magic resistance was absurd. Bell was cornered again, surviving only because he was quick enough to keep dodging. Needing more protection, he brought out his shield too. It let him block one direct hit, but the force behind it was terrifying. His hands shook as he noticed something change. The Phantom Knight had switched patterns. This time the attack came from above, a killing blow. Bell had to move immediately. The Black Knight's sword smashed into the ground and shattered the arena floor. Dust exploded everywhere, and the monster lost sight of him. A moment later, Bell appeared again much farther away. He didn't have enough mana to break that armor. Then he noticed the dust was hiding his enemy, until a glow started to form. A chill ran through him. The creature had thrown its sword straight at him. Bell raised his shield just in time to avoid getting killed. The blade bounced away across the arena. Then he realized that attack wasn't the end of it. The throw was just a fake. The real hit came from behind. He had no way to stop it. The blow slammed into him, and pain tore through his body. Bell crashed to the ground at the monster's feet. Still not done, it tried to crush him under its foot. Even worn out, Bell barely dodged again. The only reason he could still move was the elixir. Without it, he would have already lost, and now he had nothing left to depend on. Meanwhile, the creature had recovered its sword. With no clear way to win, Bell decided to gamble. His shield was the heaviest thing he had. That gave him an idea. If he used wind magic, he might be able to throw it hard enough. For once, the shield became a weapon. In fact, it was now his strongest projectile, but his plan almost failed. The Phantom Knight dodged in a way Bell hadn't expected, and now he was left completely exposed. Nothing remained to stop that sword. Trapped, Bell knew he couldn't dodge this one, and with his shield gone, there was nothing to protect him. His only hope was for the shield's path to change somehow. Then, to the creature's surprise, the shield curved back and struck it. That gave Bell just enough time to slip past the blade. He rushed in at once. This time he changed his approach. Using his hammer, he aimed to finally break through its defense. The Phantom Knight saw it coming, but it couldn't evade. The hit landed with crushing force. The creature dropped, and Bell stood there panting after the brutal fight. Throwing the shield had been a huge risk, but it worked. Now he just had to stab whatever was inside that armor. But he hesitated too long, and the knight rose again. The fight wasn't over yet. Suddenly the armor plates started to fall away, revealing the creature's real form, something Bell still didn't understand. Then the monster reached for a latch on its sword guard and pulled out what looked like another weapon. It was actually a lock. Its sword had still been sheathed, only now was its true weapon revealed. Bell had never seen anything like it, and now he had an even worse enemy in front of him. The creature suddenly became much faster, and Bell could barely keep up before getting hurled into the wall. Pain ripped through his whole body. When he hit the ground, he felt like he couldn't fight anymore. Still, the creature kept closing in. His senses were fading, and the boss moved in to finish him. Even with almost no strength left, Bell forced himself up. He knew if he stayed down, he would die there. Barely lifting his head, he saw a slash coming at him. But the attack was stopped. He had used the gauntlet. At last, the creature's luck ran out. The monster couldn't understand it. Bell looked spent, yet he also summoned his sword. For the first time, he pushed the enemy back. Now the real battle began. They traded blow after blow. Both had gotten faster, and the fight spread across the whole arena. Without the armor, the monster was actually stronger, but even that wasn't enough against Bell. With the gauntlet's power, he believed he could end it now. Then the mark on the monster changed color and glowed bright red. Bell swung, but his sword cut through an afterimage. He instantly knew he'd missed, and barely got his guard up in time to block the counterattack. That color change had made the creature even faster, and Bell was under pressure again. Still, he hadn't lost yet, and to win, he needed more power. But the more power he drew in, the more dangerous it became. That strength was addictive. A twisted figure appeared in his mind, and Bell understood the truth. The gauntlet was cursed. To gain its full power, he had to offer his soul, and he was close to accepting. A dark aura wrapped around him, and he started losing control. It felt like he himself was disappearing. The entity whispered that he needed power now. All his pain came from being too weak. That weakness was why others had always crushed him, and why he had even lost his life. It told him he should be tired of weakness by now, and that it was time to take what he wanted by force. Little by little, Bell slipped further away. Seeing the opening, the creature moved in to kill him, but Bell's power had already changed. Their blades met as equals, and the clash sent out a fierce shockwave. At that moment, only one thing drove him, a hunger to destroy. He didn't even care about winning anymore. He just wanted to break everything. The creature was first. After that, he would destroy anything else in his path. But right before he lost himself, Bell remembered his sister. That thought brought back a spark of reason. He was still fighting that powerful creature, but he knew he couldn't pay this price. His sister was still waiting for him. He wasn't fighting to kill. He wanted power for one reason only, to protect his sister. That thought let him take control of himself again. Now it was time to take down the creature and claim its power. Aegis was unbelievably strong. Bell drove the dungeon boss back with ease. The entity tempted him again, offering even more power if he would just hand over his soul. Even while struggling inside, Bell chose to keep fighting, and the creature charged at him too. Both launched heavy attacks, then collided in another burst of rapid combat. The creature tried to catch him off guard with a mana attack, but Bell was faster. He knocked the weapon from its hand and severed one of its arms. That ended any real chance it had left, and Bell finally found the opening he needed, cutting the creature clean in half. At last, the monster was finished, and the winner was Bell. Power still surged through him as he watched the dead creature start to fall apart. With the battle over, he could finally take off the cursed gauntlet. That enemy had pushed him to the edge, and he had nearly lost himself. He knew he had to avoid using the gauntlet whenever possible. Then a small vial appeared before him. It was what he had come for, ambrosia. If he drank it, his mana would rise to the level of a B-rank paladin, enough to use his divine armament powers. He had never seen ambrosia before, so he was nervous. Still, if he wanted a better future, he had to drink it. At first, nothing happened. Then his mana began rising fast. It was amazing. He had reached level B in an instant. Then the pain hit. It was so intense he could barely endure it. His chest throbbed, and his whole body felt like it was on fire. The sheath at his waist started glowing. Not knowing what was happening, Bell collapsed and blacked out. When he woke up, he was lying in the middle of a magic circle, still shaken. He had no idea where he was. It felt like another world. Then a man welcomed him and said he'd finally woken up. Bell realized it had been a long time since they'd last met. Even with the hood hiding his face, Bell knew who it was. There was no mistaking his master. He wasn't alone there either. One girl carried a hammer, another hidden man bore the gauntlet, and there was also a knight with a sword. All of them welcomed Bell warmly. He had never heard of anything like this before. This was the dimension of souls. Seeing his student again made the man deeply emotional, and Bell was happy too. His master's name was Regis, the one who had given him Avalon. Regis had also been the original owner of the Achilles shield. Seeing him again so suddenly meant a lot to Bell, but he was also confused. Since he had gone back in time, he didn't understand how Regis still remembered him. Regis explained that he had been watching Bell from this place, and had seen both his death and his reincarnation. That answer only made Bell more curious about where he was. Regis said this space existed inside Avalon itself, the place where the divine armaments were kept, along with the souls of all their past wielders. Bell was stunned by that. Then he asked what had happened to his master's real body. Regis said it was probably somewhere in the mountains, enjoying retirement. Avalon bonded with the souls of its users, and when Bell carried it through time, he lost his connection to it. Even so, Regis's consciousness stayed linked to his body. Bell quickly guessed that Avalon must have sent him back to the past, but Regis wasn't sure. As far as he knew, the armament couldn't do that. Bell hadn't expected even his master to be unable to explain it. Still, Regis told him he had done well protecting his sister. He praised Bell for that, and Bell felt embarrassed hearing it. Then he asked why he had been brought here. Regis was about to explain, but one of the other souls stepped forward. He complained that they were taking too long and said he wanted to talk too. His name was Riven, the wielder of the fire spitters. Regis told him he wasn't finished speaking with his student, but the man just told him to loosen up a little. He wasn't a stone golem. Bell could only watch, completely confused. He introduced himself to the sixth successor and said it was nice to meet him. The boy paused, thinking. When he tried to shake the man's hand, he realized it was just a prank. Riven was ridiculously laid back. The boy had no idea how to deal with that. Seeing his confusion only made Riven laugh more. He called the sixth successor pretty innocent, and then Charlotte stepped in. She pointed out that the newcomer was still getting used to everything. Riven brushed it off as a harmless joke and asked if Haru agreed, but Haru was far too shy to answer. Even as the fourth successor, he quietly begged them not to talk to him, while Charlotte reminded everyone that Riven loved messing with people. Riven told her not to get so worked up, joking that anger would ruin her looks and give her wrinkles. Charlotte was not amused at all. Their master tried to calm them down, but Charlotte clearly wasn't happy with Regis's attitude. Before she could fire back, Riven kept goofing around. For the boy, it felt strange seeing his master act so relaxed. That only proved how impressive his predecessors really were. He had already heard they were legendary heroes who fought evil. Then the swordsman told everyone to focus, and Adam, the first successor, said this meeting had a real purpose. They had called the boy into that dimension to warn him. Hearing that, he asked what the warning was. The sixth successor needed to learn how to use his divine arms properly. That caught him off guard. When divine arms are fully awakened, they release huge amounts of mana. If he unlocked that power now, his body might not survive it. That was why he had been in so much pain. He needed to wait until his body matured before opening that power. But the boy couldn't afford to wait. He was sure he couldn't stop now. He needed every bit of strength he could get to protect his sister. Adam saw that he wouldn't back down, so there was only one way to settle it. He decided to test him by crushing him on the spot. Adam moved so fast the boy had to react at once. Then he realized Adam was already behind him. The blow from the flat of the sword hit him. Adam wanted him to understand that he was still too immature. But he hadn't expected the strike to be blocked. That made Adam reconsider. The boy had grown a lot through his recent battles. Maybe he really was ready. Still, he should start by mastering the sword first. All the successors had been waiting for this. The boy asked if that meant Adam had finally accepted him. Adam said yes. If he limited himself to one power, he might be able to handle it. So he gave him permission to unlock Caliburn's B-rank abilities. The rest, including the A-rank powers, would come later. And those abilities were on a whole different level. The boy said he'd unlock them right away. Adam seemed to like that determination. Riven, still joking around, wished number 6 good luck. All of them hoped he would be able to protect his little sister. Even the quiet young man was watching over him. They would all keep an eye on him from the shadows. Now it was time for the boy to return to his body. He woke up in the dungeon. The pain was gone, but a strange feeling remained. And as he sensed the sword's power, he couldn't wait to test it on the monsters. Frigga already knew what that sword could do. To reach the monsters, they had to travel by boat, and midway through the trip, the young man warned that Leviathans would show up soon. That meant it was time to get ready for a fight. What he didn't know was that everyone there was plotting against him. Even the barber was part of it. The job already felt off to the boy. Why send a B-rank knight to kill C-rank creatures? And why would that knight need help? Something was clearly planned, and he knew a surprise attack would be dangerous, so he kept watching the man without letting his guard down. They were told they were getting close, but the area was still too calm. Then he noticed the young man had drawn a knife. The protagonist gripped the oil tightly. After cutting his own arm, the man said they first needed to lure the creatures in. He used his blood as bait, saying it would drive them wild. He was right. One creature appeared almost at once, and then several more followed. Far more than they had expected. Since they were only C-rank monsters, the protagonist suggested splitting up to protect the boat. But the other man refused to leave the boy alone. Already suspicious, the boy asked why. That's when the man finally showed his true colors, and made it clear the boy was the target. He attacked immediately. A whip wrapped around the protagonist's leg, and he knew right away he was in trouble. The one who snared him was one of the boatmen. Then the man pulled back his hood. He kept the whip tight. It was Spencer, someone the protagonist knew well, and the other young man urged him to finish the plan. Using brute force, Spencer lifted the protagonist into the air. With one leg frozen, there was no way that would end well. He was hurled straight into the sea, and Spencer still wasn't done. He used his power to spread the ice even more. That made it much harder for the boy to get back to the boat. And then the ice started sinking with him. They expected the creatures below to finish him off. As far as they were concerned, he had already fallen in battle, and the monsters would make sure he stayed down. The boy desperately needed air, and to get back up he thought of using his shield. Since it could create wind, it might get him out, so he used magic to make air. Using the inside of the shield, he managed to catch his breath. He never expected those two to team up and betray him. He had been wary of Razor, but he hadn't known there was another traitor too. The surface around the boat was frozen, and that wasn't even his worst problem. Too many monsters were circling nearby. First, he had to deal with his trapped leg. His shield should be enough to smash the ice. At last, he broke free, but his ankle was hurt. It must have happened when the whip cut into him. The monsters smelled his blood, and he instantly summoned his sword. He was outnumbered, but this was also a perfect chance to train. It was his first major test since being reborn, and now he could finally use the ability he had just gained. He aimed at one of the creatures first. The sword began to shine. A blast of energy shot out, and more swords of light formed around him, wiping out the threat. It had been a long time since he used this power. He called forth the Starblade formation. Now he could finally enjoy the hunt. More creatures rushed at him, but the flying swords cut them off. They shot straight toward their targets. This was Caliburn's true power. It could summon shining swords that flew on their own and cut just as sharply as the real blade. Before long, the creatures would be wiped out. Things weren't easy on the surface either. They were still trying to kill the monsters while using the frozen water as footing. 5 minutes had passed since the betrayal. By now they were sure the boy was dead. Spencer praised Razor, saying the plan had been brilliant. On top of that, Razor was cutting through the monsters with ease and said he was on a completely different level. He was glad the boy had stayed on his side, or he'd have died like the monsters. Still, he thought the kid could have been useful. Then the ice under his feet began to crack. As the cracks spread, he moved in to see what was happening. Instead, he was suddenly attacked. The other young man was stunned. Something huge had happened below the water. A massive hole opened in the middle of the ice. That was very bad news. A gigantic creature rose up, ready to devour them. One of its tentacles shot out of the water. He had to move fast to avoid being grabbed. This monster was B rank, the kind that normally needed several paladins of the same rank to bring down. One mistake could cost him his life, and the creature had more than one way to attack. It launched a barrage of projectiles at him. The knight dodged them all. Now he had to deal with the tentacles closing in. He knew one wrong move could get him killed too. The faster he ended this, the better his odds of surviving. His divine armament let him pour mana into his weapons and release it through each strike. Because of how simply it worked, those blasts hit incredibly hard. He believed one clean attack would be enough to put the creature down, but the monster was smarter than he thought. The knight finally unleashed his strongest blow, landing it right on the beast. But the result was nothing like he expected. The creature had blocked the hit with the body of another monster. That made the fight even worse for him. Now his enemy was completely enraged. His life was truly on the line. He had to fall back to the boat. With the ice shattered, he had nothing left to stand on, and no way to close in on the creature. And now all the other monsters in the water were another problem. They started leaping onto the boat, trying to kill everyone aboard. That forced him to focus on them. Because of that, he didn't notice a tentacle coming until it slammed hard into his face. His weapons were not made for fighting many enemies at once. Worse, the battlefield gave him no advantage, and he couldn't just abandon the boat. He looked out as more monsters gathered around them. The longer they stayed there, the deadlier it became. But even more shocking than the monsters was what appeared next. The protagonist rose from the water, even though everyone thought he should have been dead already. But then he came soaring in on his shield, cutting down more monsters. The protagonist noticed the deceiver was in trouble, and Razor just wanted to know how the boy was still alive. Even after being tricked, Bell still chose to help. Razor, though, had no faith in him. To him, that giant beast was a B-level monster, far beyond what the boy could handle. But Bell was ready to prove him wrong. The closer he moved in, the more tentacles came at him. Still, he wasn't going in blind. He was using Caliburn's power. The floating blades cut down every tentacle in his path. Watching this, Razor could hardly believe Bell had mastered his weapon's special skill. That kind of power should have taken far longer to control. Bell declared that he'd carve the monster up and feed it to the fish. The creature answered by getting ready to fire again. It launched blasts of water, but Bell never panicked for a second. If those attacks landed, the whole boat could be wrecked. So Bell prepared his answer. He changed the shape of the light blades, drawing them all back into the main sword. The scattered swords fused into one glowing blade, strong enough to fire a focused beam of energy. The monster's attack slammed into Bell's counter, but Bell wanted this win more. His strike pierced straight through the creature's body, and he flew past as the blades carved through it. At last, the monster was beaten. After that hit, it was completely out of the fight. Its body had been split in half. Razor couldn't believe the boy had pulled off something like that. When Bell got back to the boat, he made it clear Spencer was next for what he had done before. Jin's servant could already tell this boy would become a serious problem for his master. Even after seeing all that power, Spencer still wanted Bell dead. He snapped that some bastard child would never beat a B-level paladin. As Bell moved in, he was surprised Spencer still thought he could win. Since he had used Spencer in a sneak attack before, Bell figured the man was scared deep down. For a brief moment the two knights sized each other up, then both attacked. Their weapons finally crashed together. At first Bell didn't seem overwhelmed, but Razor soon showed the gap in raw strength, sending the boy flying back. There was clearly one fighter stronger than the other. Razor believed that alone would decide the battle. But Bell could already bring out his sword's special power, sending a light blade at him. Knowing how dangerous those blades were, Razor got serious right away. With only one blade coming, blocking it seemed easy enough, but Bell had set it up as a trap to hit his blind spot. Razor used his own divine weapon skill and destroyed the light blade. As it faded, he became sure Bell would never land a real hit on him. So far, the fight looked even, but taking down a B-level paladin was never going to be simple. Bell's mana was draining fast from all those skills. That left him with just one last sword. Razor's experience told him the boy couldn't keep using that power forever. It came with a cost. So he charged in hard, trying to finish it. His first strike missed the way he wanted, but the next blow and follow-up combo landed cleanly. Bell's body was still young and not fully developed, so it couldn't take that kind of hit. The strength gap between them was becoming a huge advantage. He could have used ages to end it, but he was afraid of getting trapped in the darkness. So he changed weapons instead, firing shot after shot at Razor, who dodged every one of them. That was exactly the opening Bell had been waiting for. Razor caught on to the plan and thought Bell didn't have the speed to make it work. What he didn't expect was the next move. Using the recoil from those shots, Bell closed the distance even faster, making his slash land sooner. He nearly took Razor's head off, but only managed to make him even angrier. Seeing that rage build, Bell knew his plan was working, because the last light blade struck while Razor was off guard, piercing through his back. He never saw that coming, and a wound like that meant the fight was over for him. Razor realized he had completely misunderstood the boy's plan. Knowing his enemy could no longer fight, Bell walked up calmly and told him it was over. He also warned him not to try anything reckless. But giving up was never part of Razor's thinking. He believed Bell threatened his master Jin's future, so the boy had to be stopped here. Hearing that, Bell asked why he was so loyal to his brother. That question pulled Razor back into an old memory. In that battle, he had been shattered. He had no strength left, and couldn't even keep moving. That was his limit. Then a man walked up to him and stopped by his ruined body, guessing he was the mercenary behind all those crimes. With the little strength he had left, Razor tried to look at him. The young man opened a small flask and poured it over the wounded man. He told Razor it was his lucky day, because from now on he belonged to him. That was why Razor stayed so loyal. Jin had accepted him, and Razor believed he had to repay that kindness no matter what it cost him. Then he destroyed the light blade Bell had summoned. The broken remains fell to the ground. Bell realized his enemy had already chosen how this would end. He had thought Razor was just a criminal, but now he respected the man's promise as a knight. From here on, they would fight at full power. Razor was still burning with anger and ready to keep the duel going. But Bell had seen that ability before. It was powerful, but it needed time to charge, so Bell decided to strike first. He launched the attack right away. As Bell closed in, Razor was caught off guard by a sudden move. His opponent's knee slammed into him, and he realized he'd been fooled by a monster. Now, he was on the edge of defeat. Pulling himself together, he warned that it still wasn't over. He had saved one last chance. A tiny sword fragment was still there, and it slashed across Bell's back from end to end. That final hit left Bell unable to move. Razor had thought he destroyed every blade, but sadly, he was wrong about that. Bell had only made it look that way. That trick was what let him build his winning plan. It almost felt like Bell had more battle sense than Razor, which made no sense. If Razor hadn't kept one last card, he would have lost for sure. Still, Bell beat Razor, a B-level paladin. That proved how much he had grown. The ship kept going until it finally reached the city on the continent. Stara was searching for her beloved brother, but she still couldn't find him. She kept looking through the castle, yet there was no sign of him. Even so, she didn't stop until she started to wonder if he hadn't come back yet. The problem was, the job he left for should have already been done. Then she noticed a set of open doors. It was the library. Her brother might be in there, so she headed inside to look for him, but found someone else instead. Jin stopped in front of her, catching the girl off guard. Even though they were siblings, his presence felt terrifying. She was scared, but still tried to greet him. When she opened her mouth, no words came out under that cold stare, a look so sharp it froze her in place. As he walked past, Jen called her worthless. Shaken, she stepped back until she bumped into something, making her turn around. It was her brother. He had found her and asked Jen what he wanted with Sarah, but Jen gave no answer. At last, she could relax. Her brother was here. She was so relieved to see he had made it back safely, though he was hurt again. Bell said he had run into a powerful enemy this time, a B-level paladin named Razor. Even after hearing that, Jin didn't react at all. Bell pointed out that his trap had failed. Jin only said none of it mattered. They were just tiny stones in his way. That included the foolish girl he called his sister. With that, he said he'd keep moving. He had no time to waste on pebbles. But Bell had one more thing to say. He told his brother that he would be the one to inherit the Duke's place, because Jin could never protect this family. Jin turned at once and glared at him, unleashing a harsh, hostile presence that swallowed the room. The pressure was overwhelming, but Bell still didn't flinch. A faint smile appeared on Jin's face. Amused, he laughed and said maybe it was worth looking at pebbles once in a while. As he left the library, he told Bell to come try killing him anytime he wanted. Sturry was deeply shaken by that exchange, but Bell quickly calmed her down. He knew how scary it had been. That pressure had felt unreal. His brother truly was on another level. The gap in strength between them was huge. If Bell wanted to beat him, he had to reach a level before graduating from the academy. A few days later, his bags were packed and ready. The Duke was already waiting for him, and seeing the boy prepared, Bell thanked his father for all the support. Since academy students needed bodyguards, the Duke said he'd send a B-level paladin with him. The man pledged himself to Bell's service. Hearing that, Bell had another request for the Duke, who let him speak. Before Bell could ask, though, he was surprised when his sister appeared with her bags packed too, ready to leave. She apologized for being late and dragged her suitcase over to him. Bell's request was for his sister to be allowed to join him on the trip. The Duke asked why he wanted that. Bell said he didn't want to leave Sarah behind. He wanted them to stay together. The Duke refused. The academy only allowed bodyguards, and Bell was going there to study, not to play around. Sarah still tried to change his mind, but their father shut it down and told her not to ask again. So Bell offered another idea, make her his bodyguard. He said that with Sarah beside him, he could do anything, even beat an A-level paladin. The Duke paused to think, then found the answer funny. In the end, he let Bell have his way. Soon, the carriage set off for the academy. Sarah was amazed by everything along the way. At last, they reached it. The place was huge and impressive. Sarah was proud of her brother for making it here. This academy was only for nobles. Bell told her to study in their room while he attended class. First, though, they needed to settle in. On the way, they ran into students sparring. It was just a practice match, but still a good chance to watch and learn. Sarah thought they looked strong, but Bell could tell most of them were only D-level. One student stood out from the rest, and Bell noticed him right away. Even so, he was only C-level, not enough to surpass Bell. Soon, only 2 students were left in the match, and one of them was sure this would be his win. He rushed in, ready to finally beat his rival. The other boy didn't flinch. He let the attack come right up close, and even Sarah got nervous. Then he countered so suddenly that his opponent was completely caught off guard. One hit was all it took. It didn't even look like he used a divine weapon. Bell judged him to be B-level, maybe even stronger than himself. The other students were stunned too. The representative of Rothwincer was incredible. That name immediately put Bell on alert, because Rothwincer was his family's old enemy. That made Bell and Sarah their enemies too. Not long after, the academy's entrance ceremony began. The new first years were welcomed and congratulated. The speech came from the student council president, and he made it clear he expected these freshmen to become truly powerful. Albert was a third year, and his family had produced many famous paladins. In Bell's past life they had never met, but he knew Albert had already reached S-level by age 18. That made Bell wonder if Albert had been tied to that incident. Maybe he was one of the people behind it. The students whispered that Albert was terrifying, and already B-level. It sounded like several other council members were that strong too. The council wasn't chosen by vote. It was made up of the top 4 students from the Marshall tournament, and the winner became president. No doubt Albert was powerful. Still, Bell couldn't tell if this was the man who had tormented him. To stop that kind of attack later, he needed to show his enemies his own strength. Since the council was picked through combat skill, Bell decided he wanted in too, so he could face Albert in battle. Later, in class, he waited for the teacher to arrive. A boy came over to sit next to him and asked if the seat was taken. Bell told him it was free. The boy introduced himself as Lime Flexel and said he hoped they'd have a good time at the academy. But Bell caught something important. That last name sounded familiar. Lime noticed Bell's reaction and got curious. Bell brushed it off, saying he was just surprised. A few years from now, Lime would wipe out nobles for personal revenge and earn the name Knight of Retribution. Right now, though, he was only a shadow of that future self. Then Lime asked for Bell's name, and Bell almost gave the truth, before remembering his father's warning not to reveal his house. If people knew his family name, they might favor him, and that would ruin his goal of proving himself on his own. So he gave a false name, Libel Slayer. He planned to hide who he was until he defeated Albert. Hearing that, Lime assumed Bell was a commoner too. Their uniform badges showed social rank. A circle meant commoner, while a star meant noble. Bell confirmed that he was a commoner, and Lime said he was from a commoner background too. At this academy, nobles were the majority, and commoners were rare, Since they were in the same class, Lime hoped they could be friends. Bell liked the idea. A future knight like Lime could become a strong ally. In his past life he never really had friends, so this felt strangely nice. Then another boy walked over. He already knew Lime and clearly came to mess with him. This was Roger. He mocked Lime, saying he hadn't expected to see his old friend here. The sneer said enough. He looked down on him like always. Lime answered that he had passed the entrance exam like everyone else. Roger gave a fake congratulations, and Lime only got more uncomfortable. Then Roger leaned in and said Athena wasn't a place for someone like him, just a commoner, so he should leave while he still could. Lime clearly shrank back, but Roger kept going, saying slaves should obey their masters, and someone of his rank could crush Lime with words alone. Bell stepped in and told him that was enough. Lime immediately worried about the new friend he'd just made. Roger turned to Bell, wanting to know who he was, then quickly noticed Bell was a commoner too. The look he gave him was full of contempt. Bell told him to leave, no matter who was noble and who wasn't. Roger acted like he would walk away, then suddenly moved and kicked Lime. Bell rushed to his new friend, while Roger enjoyed every second of it. Bell called him a bastard, who had no right to call himself a paladin. If he was noble, he should be protecting commoners. Roger scoffed, saying the poor existed only for nobles to use. Bell shot back that his thinking was pathetic. A county could fall just as easily as a commoner. Roger looked ready to use magic and asked if Bell wanted to fight. His divine weapon was already in hand. Knowing this was going to happen, Bell told Lime to get back. He was about to summon his own divine armament, when Roger stared at it in surprise. Bell warned that he was about to beat some sense into him. But once Roger saw the sheath, he sneered even harder. He mocked it as a useless divine weapon that couldn't even kill a fly. Bell answered that if so, Roger must be worth even less than a fly. Furious at being talked down to by a commoner, Roger decided to end this. Bell was more than ready to see him try. By now the whole class was watching. Roger charged in, while Bell calmly prepared for the fight. He kept a close eye on his opponent's movements. Then a hand appeared between them, and a woman's lyre stopped the clash. The sound shook both of them enough to halt the fight. She told them not to brawl in class, and made them listen. Bell had no idea who she was, but she kept strumming the lyre. Then she introduced herself as Silpha. She was from the Helpage family, a marquis house above Roger's rank. Right then the teacher entered, and told everyone to sit down. Class was starting. The first lesson was a test of each student's power. Using their divine armaments, they had to attack golems, as if they were monsters. The first student rushed in with a sword and struck first, but the golem was too tough. He only left a shallow mark, and it healed at once. Bell noticed that right away. More students took turns attacking, but most were still only E-level and could barely use elemental damage. Then it was Lime's turn. Roger mocked him, saying his spear had no magic, and that he was probably the only F-level student there. Lime charged and drove the spear tips into the target, but like the others, he got thrown back. Roger laughed and called him useless for not being able to use magic. As Lime pushed himself up, Roger stepped forward to show what real power looked like. His divine weapon burned with a fire-like glow. Confidently, he attacked, and his scythe buried itself in the target, leaving heavy damage behind. Some students were impressed, and the teacher praised him as D-level. Roger clearly thought he was the best in class. Then it was the blonde girl's turn. She stepped forward at last, and began playing. The sound waves hit hard, shaking the class, and tearing into the target even worse than Roger had. Those two were far above everyone else. Roger acted polite with her, only because her rank was higher, trying to stay in the noble's good graces. She told him not to bother. To her, everyone at the academy was equal. Titles meant nothing here. Roger was clearly annoyed. Next up was Bell, and Roger was sure the commoner would fail because a sheath alone couldn't do anything. Bell calmly said he wouldn't be using the sheath, then drew Caliburn and launched his attack. Roger was stunned. Bell had more than one divine armament. The blonde girl looked shocked too, and so did Lime. After the surprise wore off, Roger noticed Caliburn had no magic either. He expected Bell to strike the target and get blasted back like the rest. Bell only told him to watch closely, then began his attack. A rapid storm of strikes smashed the target completely. When he finished, nothing was left but fragments. The whole class went silent. Even the teacher was surprised. Bell had sliced the golem apart without using magic. Roger couldn't accept that a commoner was this skilled. Meanwhile, Lime hurried over to congratulate his new friend. Bell told him it wasn't that hard, and said Lime could do it too. Lime was stunned since he still couldn't use magic, but Bell reminded him his divine armament had huge potential. If he kept going and refused to quit, he could become the strongest holy knight. Those words made Lime blush. Then the blonde girl stepped in between them, and asked how Bell was so talented. She got so close that he started feeling awkward. Other students gathered too. Some said they couldn't even follow his strikes, and one student guessed Bell's sword might be the strongest divine armament among the freshmen. Roger heard that. Nervous, the student quickly changed his tune and said Roger's weapon was stronger. That only made Roger angrier. The lesson ended, and they were told the next class would be a field test, monster hunting in the forest behind the school. Everyone needed to be ready, but the class still wanted to know more about Belle. Roger called for his bodyguard, who appeared right away. The man looked exhausted and sickly. Roger had brought a familiar for protection, and he planned to use it in tomorrow's test. When the knight asked if he really meant to use it during class, Roger said it was fine. The knight praised his boldness, while Roger imagined the fear on the faces of the commoners and lower nobles. He planned to send that arrogant commoner straight to hell. The next day, the class got ready outside the academy. Monsters in the area started at F rank, and some E rank beasts had been released too. Their mission was simple: hunt monsters, and whoever killed the most would earn extra points. Roger was clearly up to something. Once the exercise began, everyone rushed in to prove themselves, and the blonde girl challenged Belle for first place. She had no idea Belle already meant to take it. He wanted everyone to see his strength. Lime asked to stay with him since he still wasn't confident fighting alone. Belle agreed, but warned him he wouldn't hold back. They ran into the forest, and soon found several monsters. For Belle, they were no real threat. He cut through them like paper. The rest of the class was trying hard too, but Belle had already taken down 15 monsters, and it still felt like nothing. Lime was amazed by his classmate's strength, but there was no time to talk. One monster slipped behind him. Belle saved him again, and warned him to stay alert, since there were more creatures than expected. Lime knew he had to beat his fear and do better. Around them, the others kept fighting and making progress, but he felt he needed to push much harder than that. Hidden in the woods, Roger watched with jealousy. To him, those commoners were acting too proud, so he decided they would pay with their lives. He raised a staff to summon something, and Belle immediately noticed the magic circle forming nearby. Something was coming out of it, a fire-controlling monster. It was a salamander, a deadly one. The students panicked the moment it appeared. Most of them ran, but Belle stayed put. Lime was horrified. The monster was already ready to attack, and he froze in fear. Once again, Belle had to save him by blocking the flames with his shield. He told Lime to run with the others. A B-rank monster should never have been in that forest, but Belle focused on the fight and fired his light swords at it. They sliced through its scales. Roger hadn't expected Belle to have a unique ability, so he raised the stakes and called his knight again. As the light swords boxed the salamander in, Lime watched in shock. Belle was actually forcing back a powerful monster. Belle moved in for the kill, but the knight stepped in and ruined the attack. Belle instantly realized someone else was in the forest. The knight came forward, praised his unique skill, and Belle guessed he controlled the salamander. When Belle asked what he wanted, the knight answered plainly. He wouldn't leave without Belle's head. The salamander launched fireballs, while the knight attacked too. Their blows crashed together, filling the area with steam, and Belle cleared it with a gust from his shield. But the knight had planned ahead. He trapped Belle's light blades in a water prison, sealing off his ability. That confirmed it. This was a B-rank paladin. Now Belle was trapped between two strong enemies, and both kept attacking. He had to fight them at once, blocking one strike with his shield, while slashing at the other. Even for Belle, this was too much right now. Lime didn't know what to do, but if this kept up, his friend would lose. Then he spotted Roger hiding in the forest with his family's summoning staff, and rushed toward him. Roger was shocked to be found. Lime demanded to know if the familiar was his, and told him to stop before Belle got killed. Roger answered by attacking, mocking him as a useless weakling who couldn't help anyone. Lime remembered his childhood training, his failure to use magic, and all the times Roger humiliated him. But this time, he got back up. Belle's words came back to him, the first real encouragement he'd ever heard. He had decided he would save his friend. Roger laughed at him, sure a worm could never beat him. Lime snapped back, telling him to shut up and stop deciding his worth for him. For the first time Roger looked uneasy, though he still insisted Lime wouldn't win just because he could use magic now. Lime agreed that magic alone wasn't enough. Roger's scythe flared as he rushed in to finish him, but Lime stood there full of confidence. His spear froze the flames and wiped them out completely. Roger never saw that coming. Now it was clear who the real trash was, and Roger grew even more furious, charging straight at Lime. But Lime's spear was stronger, and it stopped the blow cold. Their weapons locked together. Roger couldn't believe what was happening, but Lime did. With ice, he shattered Roger's divine armament and dropped him to his knees. Roger couldn't accept losing to an F-rank paladin. Lime couldn't believe he had ever been afraid of someone this pathetic. Now he felt nothing at all. He told Roger to hand over the summoning staff, and Roger demanded to know if he understood what he was doing. He bragged that his family was powerful enough to wipe out Lime's whole family, but Roger still didn't understand how bad his situation was. Lime tried to talk sense into him while freezing his legs, then ordered him again to give up the staff. With his pride crushed, Roger finally handed it over. Begging to be spared, he promised he would never do anything like this again. He had been totally beaten and humiliated. Now the staff was in Lime's hands. He warned Roger to stay away from him and Belle, or things would get worse. Lime finally let his guard down a little, but Roger was still looking for a chance. The chain of his weapon was close enough, and suddenly the far end began to glow. He was trying a sneak attack. Roger thought he could still win, but Lime saw it coming and blocked the cheap shot with ease. It was a pathetic move. Then Lime destroyed the summoning staff on the spot, leaving Roger speechless. At the same time, the salamander slowly began to fade away. The knight instantly realized something had happened to his master. From a distance he saw Roger had been subdued, so he turned toward the other commoner, but he still couldn't move freely. He had no room to lose focus. Bell had already figured out who was behind everything. The knight had tried to kill him, but in a fair fight he never stood a chance. All the man could do now was lash out in anger, throwing attack after attack and missing every time. His position was only getting worse. Even as a B-rank knight, he was near the bottom of that class. Bell closed in and smacked him in the head with his sword hilt. The difference in skill was huge. Bell told him he would be turned over to the teacher, so the knight reached for one last trick. He dropped to the ground and begged for mercy, so suddenly that Bell paused. The knight claimed he had only obeyed his master's orders, and said defying a noble wasn't easy. That excuse was exactly what he needed to catch Bell off guard, after earning his forgiveness. He thanked Bell, but was ready to betray him at once. Bell then revealed he had only been pretending to fall for it, and raised his sword. He had expected the trick all along. Lime ran over to his friend and asked if he was hurt. Bell knew Lime's help had kept things from turning much worse. Lime said he was only returning the favor. That handshake sealed their friendship. Soon the other students arrived, and thanked them too, amazed that Bell had beaten a B-rank knight. But that wasn't all that had happened. That knight was working with Roger, and the fire salamander was tied to them. He really was a rotten person. Because of all that, Lime started getting praised by the other students. In the end, he really was strong. Lime thanked them for the praise, and stayed humble about it. They told him he'd make a fine knight someday. Someone had watched the whole thing from a distance, and the blonde girl clearly liked what she saw. She had figured out how the boy's divine armament worked. Now her task was finally done, and Roger would have to answer for what he did. At the end of the hallway, the girl was waiting for them. She wanted to speak with the protagonist. When he saw her, he remembered her name was Silpha. He asked what she wanted, and she brought up Avalon, the name of his divine armament. That caught him off guard right away. She even knew it was the holy weapon once used by the heroes of the past. He couldn't understand how she knew anything about Avalon. One look at his face told her she was right. She was the first person who had ever recognized what that divine armament really was. Her reason for coming was simple. The protagonist tensed up, but then she clasped her hands and with a polite bow, asked if she could see the weapon. He definitely wasn't expecting that. She had always admired the hero's armament and just wanted to see it for herself. Since it was a harmless request, he showed her the sheath. She was amazed. It was hard for her to believe it was real. He asked how she knew about it, and she explained that her mother's family had a legend about a hero with a sheath that held many weapons. Maybe one of his predecessors had been part of her family. Lime still didn't follow all of it, but he understood one thing. His friend's divine armament was incredible. Silpha was thrilled that one of her dreams had come true, and to thank them she suggested the three of them hang out sometime. She knew a great cafe in town, and thought they should all go. Lime loved the idea, and the protagonist thought exploring the city sounded nice too. He agreed, but said he'd be bringing someone with him. Before long, the group was sitting together in the cafe. Sarah absolutely loved the strawberry pie. Bell was happy to see his sister enjoying it too. Silpha hadn't expected the protagonist to have such a pretty sister, and the compliment made Sarah blush. Watching her enjoy herself made the protagonist even happier. He was having a great time too. Nothing like this had ever happened in his past life. Then the blonde girl asked everyone to listen up. She was about to play a song for them. Hearing music from a divine weapon sounded exciting, but when she began playing her lyre, it was honestly terrible. She was really bad at it. Silpha knew she sounded awful. She was only trying to make her friends laugh, and it worked, because everyone found it hilarious and asked her to keep going. Then she pointed at Lime and said he had to sing too. Together they ended up entertaining the whole cafe. Somehow it turned into a genuinely fun little show. For him, those two were the first real friends he'd ever had. Later, outside, they were still talking about how much fun it had been. Then Silpha said she wanted to take Sarah shopping for clothes. He didn't want his sister going off alone, but his friend told him this was girl stuff. That left the protagonist pretty disappointed. All he could do was ask them to tell him if anything happened. Silpha could tell he was a great brother, and Sarah asked if she had any siblings. Her mood dropped a little as she said she had none. Just then, someone came looking for Silpha. His name was Yvelane. He was a member of the student council. For the Haas siblings, this was a strange reunion. She probably should have been nicer, but she didn't even see him as a brother. He had come to drag her into training, because if her divine weapon was perfected, it would be useful to him. She reminded him she had no interest in fighting wars. He rolled up his sleeves and said that attitude was a real problem. It sounded like he was ready to take her by force. Blood started leaking from his palm, then poured out in a heavy stream. Sarah was terrified by the sight, and the boy controlled that blood any way he wanted, so his divine weapon used blood. Silpha called for Mary, her bodyguard, but things were already under his control. When she looked back, her bodyguard had been taken down. That made everything even worse. Her brother said they were leaving now, and she told Sarah to run because it was getting dangerous. Selfa tried to defend herself with her weapon, but she couldn't stop the attack. Realizing she might call for help, he knew he had to end this fast, so he moved to finish it right away. Sarah was about to be hit, but the protagonist's friend saved her. Selfa dropped to the ground after overdoing it. It was reckless, and now she couldn't fight back anymore. Her brother used his power to seize her, lifting her into the air. Sarah was still shaking with fear, and the blonde girl had already passed out, all because of her own brother. In a panic, Sarah called for the protagonist. He rushed over at once, slicing through the boy's blood tentacles. That kind of interruption caught him completely by surprise, and Selfa was freed. Seeing that made Sarah breathe easier. The protagonist demanded to know what this guy wanted with his friend. Their peaceful outing had been ruined. The stranger asked if the protagonist was one of his sister's friends, but said it didn't matter. He should stay out of family business. The protagonist told Belle to watch the girls, because he had someone to beat up, and he was going to handle him right now. That bold answer clearly surprised the guy. He warned there was nothing to gain by protecting Silpha, but cutting through those attacks with his sword was easy, and that impressed him. To the protagonist, helping a friend was the obvious thing to do. When he struck back, the guy blocked it with a blood shield, saying this was a waste of time. That shield really was tough. A sword alone wouldn't break it, and he couldn't afford to waste mana here. The guy was already launching another attack, but the protagonist dodged it. Annoyed now, the enemy said he'd end this quickly, then fired off several strikes at once. Still, they were easy to read. Then the protagonist pulled out Fire Spitter. Seeing he had more than one divine weapon, the enemy realized this wasn't a normal opponent. Now it was the protagonist's turn to attack, and he shot down every strike coming at him. The fight had reached a stalemate. Blocking his attacks only made things harder, but he still intended to capture his sister. He formed a spear out of blood, claiming this next move would end it. The protagonist said he was right. It would. Both of them charged with everything they had. Then voices from the rooftop said the fight was getting interesting. They looked up and saw new people arriving. One of them dropped down so hard the stone pavement cracked. He landed between the two, showing off his strength, and said he'd like to join in too. The protagonist recognized him as a student council member. The blue-bearded guy wanted to know why Zeal was there, and Zeal said he was being way too rough on the kids. The girl with them called his behavior embarrassing, and mocked him as a huge weakling. After seeing his two teammates, he finally stopped attacking. Zeal, though, wished the fight had gone on a bit longer. His whole body started glowing as he said they should go all out. Then armor covered him from head to toe. He was huge, and gave off a crushing presence. The girl told the musclehead to do his job, while she summoned several chains. That was to stop him from trying anything reckless. They hadn't come to keep fighting. Feeling that magic power, the protagonist realized she was extremely strong. Even so, Zeal snapped the chains with little effort. He said Evelyn had duties with both the student council and Albert's company. Because of that, he was being sent on a month-long forest expedition, starting immediately. He understood he had no choice. As he left, he warned that he'd return for his sister in a month. The girl waved and called him a weak newbie. At least they were all gone. The student council really was full of monsters. After that, he checked to make sure his friends were safe. Silpha said she wasn't hurt, and apologized for dragging him into it. He told her there was no need. What he really wanted to know was why she and her brother were fighting. The reason was simple. He wanted to use her. As the next heir, once he graduated, he planned to expand his land by invading unexplored regions. Lime knew those places were packed with dangerous monsters. Her brother believed her divine weapon would be a huge asset in that war, but she didn't want to fight. She wanted to grow stronger and become the heir herself. In that way, she was just like the protagonist. The problem was, she still couldn't do anything. She was nowhere near strong enough to beat him. Sarah disagreed. Silpha had protected her. Those words seemed to light a small spark in her. Sarah was deeply thankful for what she had done. The protagonist wanted to thank her too, so he walked over to her. Saving someone was what true strength meant. In the past, he hadn't been able to do that. He told her to believe in herself. If she wasn't strong enough yet, she could train. Lime said she'd help her too. At first, Silpha didn't know how to respond, but she was truly grateful for her new friends. The protagonist knew that last attack could have killed her. In a month, her brother would return, so Belle had to get stronger. To do that, he needed to unlock his unique ability. That meant talking to the comedian. He needed the predecessor's permission to gain new powers, so he had to return to that space. He closed his eyes and began to focus, pouring mana into the sheath. He was welcomed by the other predecessors. It had been a while since they last met. He came with a request, but they already knew what he wanted, because they had seen the entire last battle. That blood-based artifact was troublesome. The guy could shape it however he wanted. In a way, it was a lot like Avalon. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then the comedian said if he could burn that blood, the whole problem would be solved. The boy agreed, and that was exactly why he wanted his unique ability. The comedian agreed right away, then showed it was just another joke. He really lives for this stuff. Charlotte told him to quit fooling around. Still, that power is way beyond Belle right now. It's amazing, but it burns through magic fast. If he tried it now, he'd empty himself almost at once. So the comedian set one condition: before the rematch, Bell had to fire 300 shots a day. Only then would he think about handing over the ability. That sounded impossible. Bell could barely reach 100 shots in one day. The comedian didn't care about excuses. Finish it, then come back. With that, he snapped his fingers. Bell was thrown back into his body, now convinced the comedian was funny and kind of cruel. He quickly figured out the real issue. Using that skill would take about 3 times more magic than he had now. Even the predecessors thought the challenge was basically impossible. There was no clear way for him to boost his magic that much. Still, they wanted to see how far he could go. If he didn't grow stronger, he had no chance of winning. Bell headed into the forest and started firing. He also took down a few monsters. That part wasn't hard, but the grind was brutal. Since hunting monsters was the only way he knew to raise his magic, he kept going after anything he found. His friends were amazed by his power. It helped that they came too. They all wanted to get stronger. That's how she even got Lime to join. The wish to improve was stronger than the fear. Bell really did have good friends, and that pushed him forward. After 100 shots, he was wiped out. Hunting gave him a small boost, but not nearly enough. His progress was still too slow. Then a scary roar echoed through the forest. It didn't sound like an orc, and Bell worried his friends were in trouble. When he found the beast, it was already down, and his 2 friends were standing beside it. They were celebrating their win. The girl praised Bell's part in it. Bell could hardly believe they had really taken that thing down, but they had. It was a sea-level monster, way above what he thought they could handle. Since they couldn't beat it head-on, they used a smart plan. First, they trapped it with ice. Then she hit it with sound waves, and the ice bounced that attack around it. The combo was incredible. Those two worked shockingly well together. Seeing the result of that teamwork gave Bell an idea too. Now he knew how to fire more shots. Just then, more monsters showed up. A whole pack of orcs like the one from before. That many enemies would be a huge problem, especially since everyone was exhausted. But Bell came up with something clever. He could still fight, and what he did next was beyond what any of them expected. As he rushed off, the girl remembered he still had unfinished business. The predecessors were surprised to see him return so soon. The comedian guessed Bell was here to argue about the deal. Instead, Bell said he'd already finished the challenge. That stunned everyone. There was no way he had done it in one day, and the comedian reminded him he was the only joker there. Bell didn't back down, so they told him to prove it in a fight. He had to fire all those shots in battle, though he could use other weapons too if needed, unless he was scared. Bell actually loved the challenge. He just waited for the signal. Once it came, the match would start, and the comedian was eager to see Bell's growth. The elder gave the signal. Bell already had his pistol ready, but the comedian fired first and hit him. He mocked Bell for being too slow. Against the weapon's original user, speed was everything. And sure enough, the comedian was faster. He was in full joke mode now, but Bell had no intention of losing. They traded shot after shot, and even the comedian looked impressed. Charlotte admitted Bell was amazing, and now she understood why the elder chose to train him. The elder looked proud of his student. Then the shy one said the real fight hadn't even started, and Charlotte didn't like the way he said it. He reminded them the real question was whether Bell could keep firing. Even Adam agreed. 100 shots wouldn't be enough. Bell kept forcing himself onward, but that still wasn't enough to trouble the comedian. He never lost his rhythm. Adam counted every shot Bell had fired 97. Bored that the fight was slowing down, the comedian got ready to finish it. But Bell had one more trick. He brought out the shield. That gave him a little more protection, and made the comedian rethink things. Bell was also about to use wind, channeling it through the pistol. The comedian asked what that was supposed to do. Bell answered that normal bullets were useless now. He powered up his shot with wind, pushing it past the comedian's firepower. Even the comedian was shocked by that. With this combo, Bell could hit harder even with low magic. For the first time, the comedian was actually under pressure. Even Bell's master hadn't expected that move. Charlotte started cheering, hoping Bell could beat the comedian. He asked why Bell hadn't used that from the start. Bell reminded him he'd been tricked before. Now it was his turn to return the favor. Still, keeping that move hidden wouldn't solve everything. Now he had to avoid a storm of shots, and the fight turned even again. Bell had managed to strike the comedian's first bullet, and the comedian's magic was dropping too. Bell stuck to his plan. The battle had become really tight. His opponent was finally feeling the pressure. Time to finish it. But the comedian wasn't easy to beat. He hid inside his flames, making it impossible for Bell to tell where he really was. Without knowing where the shots were coming from, Bell was hit again. Another shot landed, and then another. As long as he stayed hidden in those flames, Bell was completely cornered. So Bell used wind to blow the flames away, and that finally exposed the comedian. He couldn't hide anymore. Bell had a clear shot at his target, but he couldn't fire. Things had gotten bad. The others guessed he'd run out of magic, which left him wide open. But the comedian was out of bullets too. Then came the final clash, and the comedian dropped to his knees. He'd been pushed to the edge just like Bell. Bell had managed to fire 301 shots. After that, he had nothing left. He won by the tiniest margin. Seeing how hard Bell fought, the comedian was genuinely pleased. He reached out a hand to him. Bell had earned his approval, and the weapon's unique ability would now be unlocked. Then he politely helped Bell back to his feet. Bell was truly thankful to be recognized. With deeper knowledge of that divine weapon and a new ability, he was sure he could beat that bastard. The comedian honestly just wanted his student to win. Bell promised he would. A few days passed, and he kept training in the forest. He had to keep getting stronger, and little by little, he sharpened control over his new power. His friends came over to see what was going on. They were amazed by that unique ability, and the girl asked if he could teach them anything too. Bell said the only method he really knew was beating monsters. Still, he did know one way to strengthen the power they already had: practice every day. His master taught him this: sit down, close your eyes, and focus, then make that hand sign. It helps magic move through the body more easily. If they meditated like that for an hour each day, their magic would grow faster. It would also refine their control, making it easier to use power in battle. They decided to try it too. Soon, his friends started guiding magic through their bodies. Bell noticed they were improving fast, maybe way faster than normal. He couldn't let himself fall behind, so he chose to keep training. That would also help strengthen his unique ability. 5 days passed, and the group kept at it. After 10 days, they were already sparring with each other to grow even more. 20 days went by, and they still trained hard. Then a month passed, and Bell met that bastard again. This time, he hadn't come alone to take his sister. It had been a while since they last met. Even the girl had grown stronger. The bastard ordered his servant to grab her while he dealt with Bell, and the servant moved at once. But she had no intention of going quietly. She attacked right away with her divine weapon, though the servant was quick enough to dodge. Lime wasn't about to let her friend fight alone, and charged the servant hard. She refused to let him take Alice. On Bell's side, it was time to settle things. First, he asked one question: what exactly was this guy planning to do with his own sister? Her divine weapon was special, passed down through generations. It could control people through sound and turn them into tools for war. That goal was disgusting. To him, his sister was just a tool to make things easier. Bell didn't need to hear any more. A guy like that didn't deserve to be called a brother. The bastard sneered that anger wouldn't make Bell's weapon work on him. Bell was about to prove otherwise. The bastard frowned at Bell's stance, because Bell pointed the pistol at himself and activated his unique ability. Flames aimed straight at his own heart, then spread across his whole body. This was solely incineration, an incredible technique. Even if the bastard wasn't impressed, he could tell this was going to be trouble. The protagonist had grown way stronger, and wings burst from his back, boosting all his physical abilities. Now he could close the distance on his enemy in an instant. The bastard only fired a few shots, but they did nothing. His flames burned through the blood attacks, which the bastard never saw coming. Now the protagonist moved in to finish him for good, charging straight ahead to land a punch. The bastard quickly formed a shield that barely stopped the first blow, but it cracked apart, and there was no way it could block the second one. That gave the protagonist his opening. He smashed him in the face and sent him flying. His blood powers were useless now, and he should have just gone home. But that wasn't everything. He got back up again. His eyes had changed completely, and even his skin transformed, like his blood was boiling under it. That new form made him far stronger, and the protagonist couldn't tell what it was. It was dragon blood. It changed his whole body, making him look half human, half dragon, and his power jumped fast. That pressure was a real problem. He told the protagonist to be proud and regret pushing him this far. With claws ready, he came in with full fury. Bell watched the attack carefully. Thanks to his boosted speed, he dodged, though he still got lightly cut. His opponent looked confused. He was sure that hit had landed. In that brief opening, the protagonist set up an attack and fired his flames, hitting him clean. Then he tried to blow everything apart. The blast was huge and smoke filled the air, but his enemy came out untouched. He called the attack pathetic. His scales were spotless. No burns, no soot. Then he rushed in, ready to carve the protagonist up. Fire alone wouldn't beat this guy, so Bell switched to his fists. As they clashed again, he had to dodge those claws one more time. Only after that could he counter and drive a punch into his opponent's side. He felt the impact himself, but the dragon barely cared. Those scales could take blunt hits too. While the protagonist was thinking that through, he got caught off guard by the dragon's tail, and was slammed toward the ground. His enemy then prepared a spell strong enough to wipe him out. Bell knew he had to defend himself right away, so he fired a fireball to keep from being hit. But the dragon's attack was far stronger, and a massive explosion burst in the air. The boy was clearly wearing down. He kept pushing, but he was close to his limit, and the dragon could fire attacks like that more than once. That made this fight even worse for him, since he'd need to spend even more magic. Down below, his friends were in another fight against an enemy who was probably B rank. They decided to use a team attack. Their silent enemy simply waited for them to move. Lime was the first to charge, forcing the knight to defend. The boy drove his spear into the ground, and only then did the enemy notice the ice walls had already boxed him in. That was the girl's opening. She rushed in, sending strong sound waves at him. That combo had beaten monsters stronger than them before, so they thought this would end it. But the knight said it was all pointless. He struck his staff on the ground, and a dark magic circle appeared, swallowing the sound waves from the attack until nothing was left. The kids were stunned. With his staff still planted, he prepared a move that could wipe them out. The dark portal kept growing, then spat the absorbed sound waves back out. Thanks to that absorption skill, their attacks meant nothing. The girl was still trying to understand what had happened when the knight apologized, saying he still had to take her because of his master's orders. Lime refused to let that happen, and the knight warned him to stay out of it. Of course he didn't listen, so the knight decided to put him down. Lime was still too inexperienced in combat, and the girl could see he was getting overwhelmed. She desperately wanted to help, but her body wouldn't move. Meanwhile, Lime kept taking a brutal beating. She wished she had just a little more strength to fight back. Then she remembered the protagonist's advice. Training would help her release power in battle. All she had to do was calm down. Then she could focus on the magic flowing inside her body. Believing she could still fight, she prepared to save her friend. The staff was about to crush Lime's skull, but sound waves cut through the air. He reacted just in time. This wasn't where he would fall. The knight was thrown off by what was happening. It was the girl's sound power. Lime heard her clearly, and the music she played was beautiful. That music turned into strength inside his body, letting him push the knight back and throw him off balance. The knight couldn't understand where this kid had gotten so much strength from. Lime's divine weapon shined brightly, ready to freeze him. Ice plates burst up from the ground and rushed the knight, who realized he was in trouble. He couldn't absorb all of it. He was swallowed by ice. Up in the air, the protagonist was nearly out of strength, and the fight was close to ending. But then he saw his friends had won. Now he only had to beat the bastard in front of him, even if it meant using his hidden trump card. The dragon was curious to learn the boy had still been holding back, but he thought it wouldn't matter. Despair was coming anyway. Their battle heated up again, as the dragon pushed his power even higher. Seeing that devastating move build up, the protagonist knew his enemy was preparing his strongest attack. Still, he had something of his own to do. To make it work, he just had to survive first. The dragon finished charging and unleashed all that power at him. The energy sphere was enormous, way bigger than expected, and even more dangerous because of it. The boy had to move fast if he wanted to live. He only had one option left. He threw out his flames to avoid being hit, but the dragon kept pouring in more power, more than he could handle. He was completely overwhelmed. It looked like the battle was over, though that wasn't the ending the dragon wanted. He'd hoped for something more exciting. Only then did he notice the protagonist behind him. He'd been so focused on attacking that he forgot his own defense while charging all that power. The boy had made a clone out of flame, and the dragon destroyed that instead, never expecting him to learn such a trick. Feeling safe, he assumed the real protagonist still couldn't hurt him, because his attacks had been too weak. Now it was time to show what his training had done. He had refined his control over magic. The dragon noticed the boy's arm was covered in mana. His earlier attacks hadn't worked, but this punch would be different. The dragon glanced back and realized too late how dangerous it was. Those blue flames were the boy's hidden ace. He drove that blazing fist into the dragon's back and filled him with terrible pain, enough to break through the dragon's scales. He couldn't believe a child had beaten him. After a while, he finally opened his eyes and found his body locked in ice. He and his servant had both lost. It took some time, but they eventually woke up. The dragon figured the kids would be annoying, but since he'd lost, he let it go. Then the girl had something to say to him. She wouldn't let him start a war, and she would never be his tool. To their surprise, he agreed. He said he'd do exactly what she wanted. That answer sounded so strange that none of them fully trusted it. Even so, Lime dismissed his divine weapon, and the ice melted away. The girl told him not to come see her again. Without replying, he just told his mech to come with him, and the two left. That fight had drained everyone. It was amazing that the protagonist had beaten a student council member, though he said it was only by a small margin. The girl got up and spoke to her friends. Someday, she said, she would repay their kindness. But they told her that's not how friendship works. Then she corrected them. They weren't just friends, they were best friends. Those words made the protagonist really happy. After this fight, other student council members might come after them, so he had to grow even stronger, especially if he wanted to face Albert. He never wanted another tragedy again. He would become the strongest here and show everyone his power. One day he'd defeat his brother, become head of the family, and finally protect his sister. Many years passed, and another battle was about to start. The protagonist had finally found his brother, who was now even stronger, and had become head of the family. Jin didn't care about titles. He told his little brother a curse was on him. In his past life, he learned how painful it was to fail the people you love, and that suffering was overwhelming. That's why he stood here now. After knowing that kind of pain, he believed there was no enemy he couldn't beat. With his sister's fate on the line, Mufasa and Scar were about to clash, and the protagonist attacked his brother with everything he had, determined to change his destiny.